Schneeberger. Sherry Mix. Ryan Jayne of the Freedom from Religion Foundation speaking against. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you. So, my name is Ryan Jayne. I'm a constitutional attorney with the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which is a Madison-based national nonprofit that upholds the separation between state and church. And we are in opposition to these bills, which would force schools to segregate all athletic events based on their sex assigned at birth. This is the wrong body to address these concerns with the wrong rule and for the wrong reasons. Ensuring an equal playing field for women's sports is a nuanced question, as I hope has been made pretty clear by the testimony so far today. And the science on it is not as conclusive as others would like you to believe. The right solution to this issue is to allow experts, sports organizations considering the latest science and with input from the trans community, to decide what restrictions are appropriate, if any, at each stage of competition. This is already the approach of the most elite levels, where the NCAA and the International Olympic Committee have issued and updated rules on this topic without any significant problems to date. So since that more nuanced science-based approach has been effective at the elite level, there's simply no question that a total ban on transgender girls playing in girls' sports at lower levels, where the vast majority of athletes care more about participation than record setting, is not needed. A fair playing field at the Olympic level is certainly good enough for an elementary school soccer team or a JV swim meet. Consider the harm that this bill would do. Trans kids are more likely to attempt suicide because they are already so marginalized. Participating in sports can build confidence and a sense of community, but only if the athlete is part of their community. It should go without saying that a trans female is not likely to want to play with a bunch of boys. The sole effect of this bill will be to drive trans female athletes out of sports entirely. Finally, let's be honest about this bill's motivation. After trying to pass trans bathroom bans around the country, anti-trans legislators have not suddenly discovered a love for women's sports. It wasn't about bathrooms then, and it's not about women's sports now. Trans athlete bans in Wisconsin, as in so many other states this year, are about demonizing trans kids, sending a clear message that they are outsiders in order to score some cheap political points. If you do care about protecting women's sports, this bill is not the way to do it. And then I do want to weigh in on the Bostock discussion that's been going on, because I think Senator, you were asking some very reasonable questions about how would this potentially blow up women's sports? Because if sex discrimination applies to Title IX, doesn't that mean any boy can just show up and say, I want to play on the girls' team? And I think it is a complicated issue that the Ninth Circuit is dealing with right now, but one really clear reason that is a separate issue is that physical performance is not the only reason that you separate boys and girls sports. And a simple example of that, I'm a tournament chess player, and the chess world is badly male-dominated. And that's obviously not because of any physical build-up difference. So if you have a boy who says, I want to be on the girls' chess team, a school can absolutely deny that and say, no, you cannot. We have created a space for girls to play chess. Why? Because there's a rich, horrible history of male dominance due to cultural and psychological and other factors. It's not all about physical differences. So it's a closer question when you talk about something like the WIAA's attempt to come up with a system for an even playing field. But when you are talking about this piece of these two pieces of legislation, in particular SB 322, you're talking about a blanket ban that says if you're a first grade girl and you want to play any sport, if you're trans, you do not get to play. That is going to land you in a Bostock problem because you are denying this girl from playing on the girls' team simply because she's transgender. And that there is no comparable problem to a first grade boy who says, I want to play on the girls' team. That's a separate issue. So with that, I'm happy to answer if any of you have any questions.
Thank you, Ryan. Any questions from members of the committee? Senator Wimberger?
I do have an issue with the argument to authority, which is relying on the experts. It skirts a debate on the topic itself and rather puts it aside. Because I could very easily say, well, the Bible says something, right? And listen to the priest, he's the expert. It's a bad argument, logically, to just say rely on the experts. We're trying to address the actual underlying issue. So I disagree with the argument to authority, relying on experts, if we can ferret out the truth of the matter asserted. But I want to go down a little bit on the rabbit hole of saying that you can discriminate based on perceived social anxieties, because then can't we use that logic to separate people based on other things, for instance, race?
I think that potentially, yes. I mean, this goes to another issue that's moving through the courts right now, which is affirmative action constitutional, right? That's exactly the issue that is being debated there.
But when you go down that rabbit hole of separating people based on social norms, then, well, separate but equal is appropriate.
No, I don't think that's a fair characterization, because separate but equal, the whole reason that's such a terrible approach is because that is a mask for discrimination, right? The separate but equal idea is that we're going to...
No, but that's not what you were alluding to at all. I agree that it is a mask for discrimination. Mm-hmm. That's why it was made unconstitutional.
Right.
But what the angle you're going on there is that we need to separate them out in order to make them feel good, and making them feel good means you're creating more opportunities or betterness. So separating them actually does create the equity.
Right. I mean, that's the idea behind women's sports in the first place, right? Is you are providing opportunities for people who are repressed.
I would disagree with that. That it has to. The separation has to do with not social perceptions, but rather physical abilities.
So are you, if I may ask you a question, are you against the idea of girls' chess teams? That was my example.
Right. If it's not a physical thing, I don't see a distinction.
Okay. Well, we definitely disagree on that issue. I think there's a very good reason to provide
I think women have as equal mental capabilities as men.
So do I.
And they are personally as strong as men in their minds, and the distinctions there muddy the issue, and the issue is simply a physical, a genetic, notable physical characteristic distinction. But as far as I mean, the way that the femurs sit in the pelvis, these are important things for physical abilities. So, but as far as chess or darts, for instance, these things are not. I don't think there's a distinguishment.
Then you would just have to grapple with the question of why is there such a gender discrepancy in these sorts of competitions. I don't know about darts, but I can speak with authority on chess that there is a discrepancy.
Some people like things, some people don't.
So I would just submit that there is more. Of course, the physical question is an important one, but I would just submit that there is more going on than that. You can disagree, but I think that's one very clear reason that the discrimination based on boys versus girls is not going to be automatically on the same page as discriminating based on transgender versus not.
Yeah. But the Bostic question specifically was whether you have the characteristic of being gay or being transgender and being terminated from employment for that reason. Right. Was the issue, and ability to do the job was not the issue in that case.
Correct.
So, for instance, you can not hire someone if they can't lift a box that's 30 pounds or heavier or what have you. And you can't just declare that I can lift it and then in reality can't. So the discrimination can be based on physical ability in certain circumstances.
Yes.
But the Bostic case was not a conflation of that. It was a quite separate issue as to why there's termination. Not on a separate note, there is an argument to be made that if you're talking about first graders, for instance, that have not reached puberty yet, that there should not be a distinction in the sports teams, because a lot of times young girls are actually more developed and stronger than the boys are. But that would be a kind of a limitation in my mind as far as the logic.
Sure. Well, and if I can just go back to something you said earlier that touches on that as well, is that I think if the state Senate had the time and resources to get into all the nuances of that, then it would make a lot of sense for you to be coming up with a very detailed, nuanced rule to approach this. But due to you having to juggle so many balls, it's not surprising to me that the rule that you come up with is one that just says transgender people can't play. That's the rule.
Well, they
And
can
that's the,
play.
That's the problem. Well, they can't, because you're saying they can play with some people of the opposite gender, and that's ridiculous. That's
Of the same sex, though.
well, I mean, it's a question of framing, but you're telling girls you can't play on the girls' team. So I think a reasonable judge would look at that and say,
would
this
the
is a Boston
solution
problem.
would the solution be, instead of calling them the women's and men's team, call them the male and female team?
No,
Why not?
because because of what I've been talking about, that there are reasons to separate sports teams based on gender that are not simply a
Okay.
matter of
Then
the
there's a
physical, which I know you
just a
disagree with.
disagreement there.
Yeah.
That was a little bit of a rabbit hole, but obviously I grant some leeway on these discussions. Appreciate everybody coming to testify. Any further questions from the committee? If not, again, thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Next, we